All right, guys, welcome back to Document B, the last document I'm going over today for the DBQ on water scarcity. So this is the first document, and what it's going over is population. So where people live in China during different years. The source, so our citation, where the information came from. The author is Zamarik Shalizi, and it came from an article called Water and Urbanization out of a book called China Urbanizes, Consequences, Strategies, and Policies. It was published by the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the World Bank, and it was published in 2008. So always, those are important things to know. This was written in 2008. Now it's 2020. So some of this information might be a little older. So it's good to know. All right. So China's population distribution. In 1980, they had less than 1 billion people, just barely less in China. And 800 million of those people, or 81% of them, lived in the country. They did not live in cities. Only 19%, or 190 million, lived in cities. In 1993, the population had climbed, so 13 years later, they were at 1.18 billion people. Only 72% lived in the country. And we're up to almost 28%, or 330 million people living in cities. So that number living in cities is going up. All right, so 9 years later, in 2002, the population is 1.28 billion. That's 1,280 million, for those of you who want to know. The rural population, or the number of people who live in the countryside, is 60.9%, so about 61%, or 780 million. And the population that lives in cities is about 39%, or 500 million. In 2011, the population has climbed again. That's another 9 years later, to 1.35 billion. And there's about 660 million people living in the countryside, and that's about 49% of the population in China. But we're at 690 million, or 51% of people living in the city. So for the first time in 2011, there were more people in China living in the cities than in the countryside. And in 2017, the population is 1.38 billion, 580 million people living in the country, that's 42%, and 800 million living in the cities, which is about 58%. Now, some things I want to point out to you. Yes, the number of people living in the country actually went up from 1980 to 1993. But the percentage went down. That's because the number of people in China went up. So while there were people going up on both sides, the people living in the country went up less than the people living in the city, which is why the percentages changed. I also want to point out that the same number of people lived in cities in 2017 that lived in the country, or the rural population, in 1980. It's the same number. But the reason behind that percentages being so different is because the population had gone up about 390 billion during that time. That's a lot. So just be aware, that's why. All right, so the second part of document B is a reading. Here's the source. The author is Peter Navarro. It comes from a book called The Coming China Wars, Where They Will Be Fought and How They Can Be Won in 2008. There is a note, so this is clarifying information that that whoever put this together wanted you to be aware of before you read. It says, note, in 2018, the per capita, so per person, net income for rural residents was 14,617 won. That's equal to about 2,130. And the per capita net income for urban residents was about 39,251 won, or around 5,720. So the people who lived in the city were making more money than people who live in the country. So he wants you to be aware of that. So if you want to have more money, you live in the city. So he said, it is not just more and more people. It is also a rapidly urbanizing and increasingly affluent or wealthy population with rising incomes embracing a lifestyle that is dramatically increasing the consumption of more meat and alcohol, both of which are water intensive to produce. In addition, urbanites, that's people who live in cities, with showers and flush toilets generally use much more water than their country cousins. And here are the content notes. I decided to put these first. China recently ended its one-child policy, so families are now not restricted to only having one child their entire life. They may now have 2 children without being penalized. This decision was made because China's population was getting super old and there weren't enough people to be taking care of them and to work. 25 of the world's 100 largest cities are in China. So 1/4 of the world's largest cities are in China. Shanghai is expected to have 30 million people by 2030. That's a lot of people. And then China's middle class is expected to double in size by 2025. This middle class has more income, more disposable income, and they consume more. While this does help the economy, it is stressing different resources, especially water. All right, so number 1, by how much did China's population increase from 1980 to 2017? If you do the math, the population went up 39 million. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. All right, on number 2, how has the population distribution changed in China from 1980 to 2017? Well, we have a lot more people living in cities now, right? We saw that over from 1980 to 2017, more and more people were moving towards the cities, and now I think it's something like 58% of people who live in cities. It's a lot. I know it's like 800 million, right? According to Peter Navarro, how do urbanization and increased wealth impact water usage? Well, when you've got more money, you're going to spend more money. And a lot of goods require water to produce. Meat, vegetables, they all require water to grow and be produced. You also have the ability to access water better when you live in a city, when you have access to a sewer system, when you have water in your house. In rural China, not all houses have access to running water, even today. So the access to running water is going to use up water more quickly too. And as I said, of course, the availability of goods and the ability to buy goods that are created using more water. Question number 4. In what ways is China's changing population driving the water scarcity crisis? So once again, the fact that people are moving to cities is going to cause more water to be used because they're moving to places that have a little bit less There's easier access to water, especially running water. And of course, as I said, there's more using water. And then number 5, how could map B from the hook be used to bolster or support? Bolster means support your argument. So the whole idea is that there are hundreds of cities in areas with water shortages. Look at Shanghai North. Oh, there's so many cities there, and that's where all the water shortages are. So that's going to be a major, major problem. All right, guys, that is the end of document B. I will be back with more videos once we do more documents.